confirmed, I will approach my ambassadorship with respect for the South African people.
After President Trump nominated Bozell in March, the conservative activist, writer and liberal media critic finally had his day before a committee that will play a pivotal role on his pathway to confirmation before the entire Senate.
I come before you at a challenging moment for U.S.-South Africa relations. The President has expressed serious concerns about South Africa that for too long have been unaddressed. When people and businesses in South Africa believe their private property rights are at risk, when many South Africans feel unsafe in their homes, when rampant corruption and unfair business practices hold back the South African economy, and when South African politicians greet as friends those who seek to destabilize the world's peace and security, then common ground between our two countries feels harder to find.
Bozell named a number of key priorities once confirmed, including objecting to what he called South Africa's drift towards China, Russia and Iran, advancing President Trump's resettlement invitation to Afrikaners, pressing the government to rescind support for the expropriation of private property without compensation, advocating for business interests by promoting fair trade practices and reducing barriers, and pressing South Africa to end its ICJ case against Israel.
What South Africa did in leading the charge against Israel in the International Court of Justice was an injustice. It's going to be a top priority because the President has made it a top priority.
This exchange with Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen touched on earlier claims by President Trump of a genocide perpetrated against Afrikaners, asking Bozell if he agreed that the allegations were both morally and legally absurd.
If you were to talk to those people who are involved, they fear...
Mr. Bozell, I'm sorry, genocide is a legally defined issue. No. It's not a question of someone's impression. There's a legal definition for it. To your knowledge, has the State Department legal advisor concluded that the government of South Africa is engaged in genocide?
Senator, I don't know that answer, but Senator...
No, it's a straightforward question. I'm not going to... It's a straightforward question. There's a legal definition of genocide. I want to know if you agree that that's an absurd claim made by the President of the United States.
Senator, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't address it that way.
He was also pressed on recent reports in both the New York Times and the Washington Post that pointed to a future U.S. refugee program that could heavily favor the resettlement of white people, the vast majority white Afrikaners.
Do you agree that we should not have a refugee policy, admission policy, that's based on race?
Senator, in South Africa...
No, it's a straight... I'm asking you if we should have a refugee admission policy based on race. Again, it's a simple question, sir.
Senator, I'm trying to answer it.
Yes or no? Should we have one based on race?
In South Africa, you have thousands of attacks that have taken place against white farmers. They fear for their lives. What the President is saying is that they can come to the United States as refugees if they fear for their lives.
Right. So that's not an answer to my question.
I don't want to litigate the specific...
Democratic Senator Chris Murphy picked up where Van Hollen left off, asking Bozell if he supported a U.S. refugee policy that admitted only white refugees.
Senator, I don't make that policy.
Well, but it's really important. But I think this is if I were to ask this question of virtually any nominee to be an ambassador prior to this panel, that would be an easy layup answer. No, of course we don't support having a refugee policy where we only admit white people.
Senator Van Hollen also questioned Bozell about his lack of support for anti-apartheid legislation in the 1980s that is often credited with playing a key role in the fall of the apartheid regime and for being a vocal critic of the Reagan administration's efforts to engage the African National Congress, viewing the movement as a terrorist organization, opposing any engagement.
As I look at your comments from that period, you were not supportive of that effort. Is that a fair characterization of your statement? I'm being very broad.
I'm not aware of what you did, Senator, but I can tell you what our position was as conservatives back in the 1980s. ANC and Nelson Mandela at that time were aligned with the Soviet Union, which was the biggest threat to peace in the world and the mortal enemy of the United States. As such, we were in opposition.
Okay.
I think, Senator, at the same time, it's an extraordinary evolution that 10 years later, approximately, when the wall came down and that association ended, so too did the relationship that the conservative movement had with Nelson Mandela. If I'm asked today, who do I think is the most revered person in South Africa? Who do I have the most respect for? It would be Nelson Mandela.
It's unclear when the full Senate will vote on Bozell's nomination. But expectations are that he will be confirmed given the 53-vote majority that Republicans currently hold in the 100-seat Senate and the broad deference the body largely gives to the president's nominees. And while it's within South Africa's remit to reject any nominee, that move seems unlikely, given a diplomatic reset that has been prioritized between Pretoria and Washington in recent months. Sherman Ricepies, SABC News, New York.